Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming or paying attention, as the case may be. Call the meeting to order. Tonight's special meeting item is consideration of the beach management plan developed by Moffitt and Nickel for us to be submitted to the Coastal Resource Commission pending determination by council. So, David?
Yes, ma'am. No actions being taken tonight. There is a public hearing on the 4th at 6 o'clock. So we'll have that to go along with this as well. And we have Sam and Doug here tonight. If you would like to have them come up and start their presentation, we can have them come up now. Sam, Doug,
Please.
Who wants to go first?
Good evening, and thanks for allowing us to come and present on the beach management plan. My name is Sam Morrison with Moffitt Nickel. I'm the technical director of dredging services for Moffitt Nickel, and I've got with me my colleague Doug Huggett, who is the senior permit specialist, and as everybody probably knows, he has 25 years experience with DCM. And if you recall, he was here at the August 16th meeting and kind of went through some of the changes that occurred when CRC made the rules change. So what I'm going to talk about tonight a little bit is kind of recap the changes in the regulation, what does it mean to the town, and how it affects the town, and what are the next steps if there are possibilities for that. Talk a little bit about the beach management plan, some of the higher level details. We've also given you a plan that's the actual plan that's about 55 pages long, so there's a lot in there. I'm going to give you the higher level details of it, and if you have any questions, we can get into more details from the plan itself. And then what are the options to the beach management plan? Go through a couple of options that you might have to either moving forward with the plan and not moving forward with the plan. And then what are the next steps? What's required on the steps to get the beach management plan adopted by CRC. So as a recap from what Doug had spoke about on August 16th is on August 1st, the CRC eliminated the development line. This is a line that the town operated under since 2016. As you are all aware, this is the line that determined where the development happened as far seaward as they were allowed to develop. But what this change did by removing it, it required the town to revert back to the previously established, called the static vegetation line from 1998, but it's now under this beach management plan, it's called the pre-project line. So I might interchange those two, but they're one and the same. So basically, you have to revert back to that static vegetation line to determine where your 60-foot setback is for development. And then it allows, what the change in regulation also allowed the communities to apply for a beach management plan, which is formally known as the static line exception. And what that does, what the beach management plan does, it allows for an establishment of a new first line of stable natural vegetation at the time of development. So if the beach plan is put into place, it's approved, the setback will be measured from that first line of stable natural vegetation or the pre-project line, whichever is further seaward. So I'll just for this fact, I'll show you this slide right now. The purple line was the previous development line. And this is just kind of a sample location with homes on Oak Island. So this shows where all the properties and the homes were conforming. They were within a building envelope that was conforming. Now that now that the town is required to go back to the pre-project line or the static vegetation line, and then you measure a 60-foot setback from there. You can see in this example here that green dashed line goes back and makes most of those properties not having a conforming lot or not having a proper building envelope. So that's kind of just how that lays out. But just so you know, is if the beach management plan is approved and in place, even if the first line of stable natural vegetation moves seaward, move seaward 200 feet, and then the setback is measured from there. In no event can development occur beyond the sight line of the adjacent neighbors. So this won't allow you to develop any further seaward than the development that's already occurred. So that's a key point of this plan. Again, so one of the things with this development of this new first line of stable natural vegetation, with the first two projects that we completed in the last two dredging seasons, we established this dune and planted, tried to start establishing dune grass to the seaward crest of the dune. So the goal here is, if you can see from the green lines, we are now operating as of August 1st under this pre-project 1998 vegetation line, and there's a 60-foot setback from that point. So again, what this actually does is it makes approximately 80% of the oceanfront lots not having a proper building envelope. So what we've done is, by trying to establish this first line of natural vegetation, or natural vegetation on the seaward crest of the dune, then measuring the setback from there, we're trying to get the setback from that first line basically approximately the same as the development line was existing prior to this rule change August 1st. So as far as the beach management plan, again, it was formerly known as the static line exception. The town must develop a plan that is a minimum of 30 years of a comprehensive beach maintenance plan. So we really can't just look at the pre-project line and say, oh, these 5 houses are conforming, or they have a building lot and we're not going to include them as part of the plan. It has to be a comprehensive plan. We can't just pick and choose pieces of the beach that will allow the plan to be accepted. The details of the plan, we must provide an anticipated maintenance event, which is we have to set triggers and then timing or schedule of those events. We need to identify the sand needs. So from the schedule, the amount, we need to identify a quantity of sand, and then where the locations of those available sand quantities are. And then we have to come up with a financial plan, how this plan is going to be paid for. And then we also have to have public outreach, which that must be included in the plan. And then the plan is a 5-year plan. Even though it's a 30-year plan from the town's perspective, it can be updated, and it must be reviewed every 5 years for changes in compliance by CRC. Oops, sorry. I'm having trouble changing the slide here.
You trying to stay in the PowerPoint or pull up the?
Oh,
PDF?
did I? Sorry. Okay. Yep. Very good, sorry. So this is, so as part of the plan, as I said, there's kind of 4 parts to it. And the first part of it was to establish triggers and maintenance schedules or event timings. So you guys have all seen this graph before, and it's how we establish the anticipated maintenance trigger event. We used modeling to determine the trigger volumes, and what we did is we took the volume from the dune to the outer bar to -12. So the area in yellow here is a volume that we calculated across the island on transects that we do from annual monitoring. And this was used to then calculate and model a level of protection for the town. And the results of that gave us, we looked at it from 2 different aspects, from a 10-year level of protection from a 10-year storm event or a 25-year storm event. So these are the results, and how much, again, material that needs to be within that box or measured within that box between annual monitoring events to signify if we're above these numbers, we haven't reached the trigger that we are required to do a maintenance project. We've displayed here the 10-year and 25-year. In the plan itself, we have put forward the 10-year level of protection with the assumption that the town might strive for a 25-year level of protection in the future. But just know that the level of protection here, whichever one they decide, the town would decide to maintain, it will no way it will no way affect the maintenance quantity or maintenance schedule, because the maintenance quantity and schedule is based on annual loss, regardless of where the beach starts. So it doesn't change, going to a lower level of protection doesn't change that schedule or cost or quantity. So after we figured the trigger events, we then also had to figure out the schedule. And what we did is we did some crystal ball analysis of the actual losses on the beach annually. And what we came up with an annual loss and what the 12-foot annual loss, 50%, is basically the statistical mean of loss per year. The 75% means it's a statistical probability that it will be, 75% statistical probability it will be below that number. So we used the mean number. We went through and had with storm, without storm, the 213, 247 is a key number. That's the one we used for 6-year nourishment cycle, which basically came up to 1.3 million cubic yards, which you've seen in a number of previous presentations for the renourishment maintenance events. And so that equates to a 30-year volume need of 6.5 million cubic meters. And again, for statistical analysis, that could raise by 1 million cubic yards, but there's a 75% confidence it won't go over that. So this is basically now, once we've figured the quantities, which on the left-hand side we show our sand needs, there's the project that's already planned for 24-25, which is the 1.65 million. There's maintenance projects of the 6-year cycle, the 1.3 million per cycle, which is 6.5 million. There's storms, and we were just being a little conservative on this and used the 75% on the storms. That's 3.9 million. Then there's sea level rise. So the total sand need is 12.45 on the beach. The column to the right there is the 30-year dredge need for volumes of dredge, because we have to find 30% more than what's actually measured or put on the beach when we permit these projects because of losses and compaction and other things. So the total we need to identify is 16 million, basically 200,000. And off over to the right, there's anticipated borrow areas. We've listed some 7 borrow areas, Frying Pan Shoals, state and federal, old and new ODMDS, Lockwood Folly, Jaybird, Yellow Banks, and Wilmington Harbor Channel. And we came up with, there's 99 million cubic yards available as a sand source. Now, as you can see, that approximately 87 million of that is from Frying Pan Shoals, so we're depending heavily on Frying Pan Shoals as a borrow source, excuse me. So once we know the quantities, the timing, we had to come up with a financial plan. So we provided this graph and you've seen some of this before, cost of projects funding in today's dollars for the 24-25 project. The total cost is approximately $40 million or $39.93 million. The maintenance event, it's a little different than what you've seen in the past. It's 1.38 instead of 1.3 because sea level rise needs to be included in that. It's anticipated that there's going to be 6 inches or just over 6 inches of sea level rise in the next 30 years. So that equated to that 400,000 cubic yards in sea level rise that we need to account for in the maintenance plan. So there's 1.38 million cubic yards for the maintenance events, and the total cost of that is $33.3 million. For the 24-25 project, we have secured a state grant of $20 million. The accommodations tax fund is the 9.1, 10.2 on hand and receiving 3.3 to 3.8 annually. The sand tax fund is 7.1 million, 2.3 on hand and receiving 1.6 to 2 million a year. And the general fund, 3.8 million, 17.7 million on hand and receiving 1.5 net revenue, million of net revenue a year. So it's a total of $40 million of that initial project. For the future maintenance projects, it includes, like I said, the project losses and SLR without the storms. The occupancy tax it's anticipated to be 3.3 to 3.8 million. Local sand tax is 1.6 million annually, expected to be 2.0 million by 2024, for a total of 4.9 to 5.8 million annually. So the total over 6 years is 29.5 million to almost 35 million. So it falls within the town under the occupancy tax and local sand tax to be able to cover the cost of these projects.
Can I ask you a question real fast?
Sure.
What's SLR without?
Sea level rise,
Thank you.
sorry.
No, it was probably on another slide. I missed it.
Yep. Yeah, that's sea level rise, and like I said, it's anticipated just to be over 6 inches in the next 30 years.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
So how is it you define storm? Are we named storms? Because we didn't have a named storm this weekend
These are
and we lost.
name storms.
Okay.
Yes.
So how do you factor in for events like this past weekend? Is that just
That's background
calculated?
erosion.
Okay, thank you.
That's why if we go back to this slide, you'll see per cycle, which is a 6-year cycle, we assume only 2 storms. And then we're using the 75% confidence that it won't go over that level. So it's a little bit conservative as far as that quantity.
Thank you.
So the final aspect of the beach management plan is it requires a public outreach and comments. Any public comments we must include as part of the plan when we provide it to DCM. So if we are going to provide a plan, we need to account for the timing of a comment period for the submission of the plan. And then there may be comments that need to be addressed, not only placed in the plan, but addressed within the plan. So Moffett Nickel will need time to address any comments that are appropriate to change within the plan prior to giving. And just so you know, the beach management plan process, no comment period time is specified. And as I said before, the plan is updated and reviewed and must be reviewed every 5 years for changes in compliance. The key thing here is we expect the initial plan to be accepted based on where we are with triggers right now. And then the 2024, 2025 plan will extend the project out to, out till if the plan were to be adopted this year or even early next year, it should extend the beach nourishment out beyond hitting a trigger by 2027 or 2028, the next time the beach management plan would be up for review. Mm-hmm. So, with where we are today, with the Plan 24-25 project, and if we get the plan accepted, we should go out 10 years with the beach management plan. But it would be expected there would be a maintenance event in that second 5 years.
Right.
If there's during the pre-project line right now is currently set, but during the 5 years, it's not set for the 5 years. So during the 5 years, if there is development that wants to happen on an individual basis, DCM will come out and establish what that first line of natural stable vegetation or stable natural vegetation is, and that will be the setback for that development. And again, with the caveat that it can't be any further seaward than the adjacent homes. So anytime during the 5-year plan on an individual basis, that line can be reestablished. And just because that's a caveat of setting that new line as that first line of stable natural vegetation, the town should expect to do a robust planting program, if not every year, every other year, to maintain that line of vegetation. Options to the beach management plan. I mean, to us, there's two options. You can reduce it in size. However, the triggers are set by erosion, storms, SLR. So you can't, you could reduce it in cubic yards per foot or with the beach, but it would just cause the maintenance events to happen sooner, which is more costly, which we've given presentations on that because of mobilization cost. Or you can shorten the length of the beach, but then you're going to have to choose who benefits, because those people where you don't have the beach management plan in place will not have that new option of the new first line of stable natural vegetation. They'll always be on that pre-project 1998 line, which may deem their property not having a building envelope if something happens or if it's not developed at this point. And again, or you can remain to go without the beach management plan, which just means the 1998 static line remains in effect, or the pre-project line remains in effect. And just to go back to our graphic for the cross-section, if we maintain where we are at this point, I would say this is representative of up to 80%, about 80% of the properties on the oceanfront first line of homes, that the setback is behind the home where it is now, in some cases much, I mean, almost to the road.
So if we don't submit now for consideration in November, is it up to us when we submit, or are we locked into a time frame for application?
No, so let me go through the next steps and I'll answer that right now. So the goal coming in to tonight was, we were saying let's have the beach management plan in front of the CRC for their November 16th, 17th scheduled meeting. They have another meeting scheduled in in February 22nd, 23rd. So that would be the next opportunity to get it in front of the CRC. There's no timeline to get the plan in front of the CRC. What it does is, just until you do, you're at that 1998 pre-project line, or static line. So yes, there is another opportunity, and there's another meeting in April after February. So, but I just did put that in there. So approval of the beach management plan, the process, the town council, as the goal to get it to CRC by November 16th, 17th. It is a tight time frame, and we'd say that the town council would need to vote next Tuesday on whether they want to move forward with getting it to CRC. By the end of next week, we'd have to have public comments. Moffett Nickel address them, provide the plan to DCM by the end of next week. And then that would give DCM 1 month to review back and forth with the town, Moffett Nickel, on any comments or things that might need to be changed. And then once that is done and DCM is reviewed, they'll provide summary and recommendations to the CRC a week to 2 weeks in advance of the meeting, allowing them to get it on their agenda. Then the town would orally present the beach management plan to CRC at their November 16th, 17th hearing. DCM would also present their summary and findings or recommendations at that meeting, and then CRC would vote whether to adopt it or to send it back for revisions. If the town elects to hold off till the February 22nd, 23rd schedule, I would say the month for DCM to provide their summary and recommendations and have the back and forth with the town is a very condensed time frame. So if we do wait, I would plan on more like 6 to 8 weeks to give DCM, to give them sufficient time. And so that's all I have for tonight. That's the path forward, and that's what the plan entails. As I said, there's a lot more very detailed information within the plan. You know, if anybody would like to go over any of those details or has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
You go back to the slide that shows the 1998 line,
The cross-section or the plan view?
the one with the structures, showing the structures and the, nope, there, thank you.
I can tell you, this was taken from an actual section of Oak Island. You know, so just to show an example of what it will look like, or what it does look like at this point, where the development line was and where the setback it currently is. And I believe the town has available the pre-project or the setback, the line, I guess the static vegetation line, with the 60-foot setback on file. I mean, they know across the entire island where those setbacks go to.
Sam, if I may ask you, you said there's 99 million cubic yards available according to your graph,
Correct.
and we would be needing 1 point.
We have to show a 30-year plan, so we need 14.5 million cubic yards
And out of
over
those-
that 30 years, so we have to show that.
Yes, sir. And out of those 99 million, we would be fighting with
16, sorry.
Ocean Isle Beach, Caswell, Curie, Carolina Beach, Wrightsville, Topsail, Emerald Isle, Indian, Salter Pass, Pine Knoll Shore, Atlantic, and Nags Head. Would we be fighting with all of those for that 99 million?
Not necessarily. Some of them, you know, are, I mean, for instance, Wilmington Harbor Channel, there's only so many places that can go because of its proximity. But a lot of these are proximity-based. It becomes not cost-effective to go further away, even frying pan shoals. But yes, I mean, I would say the minute we would get frying pan shoals permitted, that we're not going to be the only one. Absolutely.
And also, if I may ask, besides the 99 million cubic yards, which may or may not be available when we go looking, that's all based, the price is all based on today's prices.
Correct.
So that 30 million or $16 million totals could always escalate.
Absolutely, but the assumption is, so would your sand tax and occupancy tax go, it would escalate as well over time.
Hopefully. Okay, thank
So
you.
please feel free to correct where I'm going to go with this. I appreciate the detail, but I think the timing, to me, feels rushed. We're talking about ballpark $170 million over 30 years. We're talking about a shortfall of $5 million with the most optimistic projections on funding. I mean, we're on the edge of a recession. You're talking about mean numbers in terms of the way you are identifying the scope of the projects, but that could be off. Maybe we ought to be at 75. And we're looking at, to use your phrase, a binary option. Either we accept the static line and we have non-conforming homes. I don't know if it's 80%, I don't know what that number is yet, but it would be a significant number. Or we can reduce the size of the beach, or we could invest in this plan. And one of the things that I think we really need to think carefully about is the prospective cost of keeping the static line and the risk versus the cost of the investment. I mean, we need to sort of see that and think about that carefully, right? Because you're talking about $34 million every 6 years, and that's probably a conservative estimate. It could be a lot more, depending on where you find the sand, how much sand you find, et cetera, right? I mean, that would be fair.
Yeah, yes, well, two points, Councilman Bach, that if you want to, I mean, if we want to take means all around, I mean, we think the revenue stream is 34 or 35 to 29 to 35, right? So it's probably 32 million compared to 33.5 million. So we may have a 1.5 million shortfall every 6 years. So I mean, that could be made up by the general fund or other options, but, and I would assume there's going to be other grants come out in that 30-year from the state, but no guarantees. We don't have them in place, so we can't present them, right?
My point is there are a lot of embedded assumptions here that I think we need to think through. Our current plan assumes a growth rate, right? And we exceeded it in year one, but years 2, 3, 4 are not looking so good here economically. It could be very different. And so I think we need to look at the risk, we need to look at the potential cost, and we need to think through the options. I, for one, do not think we should submit anything until February, and we've had a chance to really analyze this. Because what you're asking is frankly a lot. And
Understood.
it's all well and good to say, these are the assumptions I have, and the taxpayers are going to get all this without a tax increase or without crimping our ability to do anything else in terms of infrastructure or project development. It will all be for sand. It's sand in perpetuity. And I think before we make that kind of a commitment, we need to really think this through. That would be my point. And I realize I'm not asking a question. We're having a conversation.
Yeah,
So-
sure. And a couple of comments on that is one thing we don't include in the plan that could reduce the cost, because there are things that can, for instance, Lockwood Follies. There is a cost to the town with that, but when that gets put on, that reduces, because these erosion rates don't take into account Lockwood Follies being placed on there, so it's standalone. And any material that comes from the maintenance dredging of Wilmington Harbor coming to the east end, that also reduces these quantities. So there's things that, depending on how often that happens and things, but we can't put them in the plan because we're not in control of those, right?
Sure.
So,
I understand that. And we can all play with these numbers, and I think we need to play with them
sure.
in a thoughtful way as we look at this. I mean, I could argue if paid parking passes and we get 1,500 spaces, we could have $1 million offset every year. But I don't know that, and I don't know that I can assume that. That's part of what's happening here, and that's part of strategic thinking, but I think we need more time than next week to make this kind of a decision. That was my point. We really need to take a look at this, run these numbers a couple of times, think it through, look at the impacts, look at the probabilities, and thank you for starting that, for precipitating that conversation. I mean, it's thoughtful, it's scientific, I appreciate that. It's also very costly, and it is a huge decision, because if you're paying that much for sand every year in a cycle, nothing else is going to get done, and we frankly have other things that we need to do. So it's going to be a difficult choice. But again, thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Sam, a off-the-wall question, sir.
Sure.
If we were to start something like this and submit a plan, and then 2 or 3 years down the road back out, we would go back to the earlier static line.
I'll have Doug stand up and correct me if I'm ever wrong on this, but my understanding is if you start this program, and that's why I was trying to, because I was kind of, I think, speaking to the mayor at the beginning, is the way you're set up right now, if you put this plan in, then we have the 24-25 project, and the plan gets adopted, just let's say February for talking purposes, then by February 2028, because of the 24-25, if the calculations are correct, we should be outside of the triggers at that point when the plan gets reviewed, and if we're maintaining the beach as we say we're going to maintain it. So then another 5 years would kick in at that point. It would be good until then at that point, 2033. And you don't have to say that 2030, we're done, we're not doing it anymore. You just don't do it, and the next time it comes up for a review, it doesn't get renewed, and you go back to the pre-project line. Or do you stay at the first line of natural that's been established? You go back to the pre-project line.
Or the static line as it was previously.
So there's no, put our hands up, we don't want to do it anymore. If you have it, it doesn't cost you anything to keep it until the next review period.
So
But my underlying question, and Mr. Eads is not here, our attorney, to answer this. If we were to open that gate and have the homeowners on the oceanfront think that they are being protected with a plan, and then we pull that plan away, I wonder what kind of, I'd want to ask our attorney what kind of liability that would put us under to those homeowners. And that's the scary thought.
And I think
Yeah, and I can't
Councilman
answer
Kraft raises a good point. Let me look at it in a slightly different way, put a different frame on his question, which I think he's got a direct question, he's got an implied question. So if we filed in February and the project that we're currently working on comes to fruition, we're in effect going to be good for 5 to 10 years. Somewhere in there, we're going to hit the cycle on the first $34 million payout. The temptation here, I think, is to say, let's just kick this can down the road and let council sometime in the future wrestle with it. I don't personally want to do that. I want us to really be thinking clearly about what we're committing to, even though we may have an option to get out. But once we go down that road, there are going to be expectations. And I think that we owe it to the citizens to make a thoughtful decision rather than say, oh, the current project is paid for, half of it's paid for with government money, and we're good till 2028. We don't need to worry about it. That would be, I think, something that we would not want to do. I think we want to make an affirmative decision. But again, that's just my point of view on it.
I just want to make one point, if you'll go back to my favorite slide again.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so the one thing I want you to remember is not only would those houses be at pre-project if we did not do this. Mr. Kelly, can you tell us what's on the other side of those houses?
I mean, if you're looking at the roadway, we have Brunswick Electric, our water, sewer, cable, all those kind of things. Sam and Doug, I mean, they look at erosion rates and they see volumes and those kind of things. So they could give you a number of estimated,
Right.
I mean, it's years, but
Right.
they could give you an estimate of how long it would take, whatever beach we have there currently. But there's things that council can look at, and we sort of discussed a few things today. The 24-25 project could proceed as planned. And then there's always the option, and the mayor brought this up today in some discussions, we could always retain just the static line and not do the other plan, to leave the static line in place instead of going for the beach management plan.
While under a beach management
Yes.
plan even.
So there's always things that other things that we can look at during this whole process. And council, when we were given this and we had, it came to July 1st or whatever it was, this was going to be implemented. And we started looking at what we could do to try to help the citizens. Courtney went out, did the CAMA permits, as many as we could get for the new home constructions and the people doing maintenance repairs and damages and all those kind of things. And then we had a very aggressive schedule on this. But it was something that we were looking at to try to get done. And so then I talked to the mayor and Councilman Bach today. Maybe it is time for us to look back and still be able to see what we can do. The vegetation that we planted after this project, I mean, we just did an inspection on it yesterday. It's growing. And so the grass that we're going to be measuring from is growing. So the timetable that we have, the window is what we're looking at. If we do this in February or whenever you said the next one was. April, that grass is still growing that you'll go back and measure to. So you have that time frame where the house could possibly be damaged or whatever inside that window. And hopefully we make it through hurricane season and nothing happens to us. But those kind of things are already out there, and Doug can give some information on this. CAMA's always looking at other things. You were a LPO officer, Councilman Bell, and so was I. And back in the day, we used to look at 6 different grasses to make up what it was. And if you didn't have those, then it wasn't there. And sort of some of those things have sort of gone away, and it's become, you got grass,
Right.
stable, and this and that. And Doug's sort of hearing that this may change all the way around anyway, and it'd be a limit where we plant, just like Sam talked about on our last project, we plant this. We have an aggressive schedule to go back and replant. We may plant this grass this year and that grass the next year to try to establish something. But if they come in and throw a 2-year window for a planting of a dune, then it's 2 years. And it's not a stable first line of vegetation until that 2-year time frame's up.
Right.
So we could adopt something, they could change their rules, and we're still sitting here not being able to measure that first line of vegetation
Because it's not stable.
because it's not
natural
stable.
vegetation.
So there's other things that's still back there that's sort of out of Doug's and Sam's and our control as well, that we still got to be able to look at. So I just wanted to bring those up, that it's not a fine line that we can sit there and say, this is what we can do today.
Right.
Because there is some things. The paid parking, Councilman Bach brought up, I mean, we are looking at that. You have an aggressive schedule for that as well. So there's all kinds of things that are in front of y'all right now, rec center and some other things that we're trying to do. So I think, putting this not off, but putting this where we can see alternative measures. If we do paid parking, what kind of numbers we can estimate for revenue. We can plug that in and see what kind of relief we got. I think we approved the first plan back in April. So we have something approved for the $20 million or the $40 million project. But this will give us some time to be able to look at what other revenue sources that we had. Councilman Martin and Councilman Kraft, when they looked at things, they looked at growth patterns and things, everything that we had laid out. And then Hatton and I looked at numbers. And then we came with a plan that we thought we could go look at. But we looked at the short term to get us to the big project. And then we had numbers left over, revenues going out. So I think once we get more of a handle on what we are going to do for paid parking, if we're going to do paid parking, and we started looking at another revenue source. We've met with Holden Beach. They've told us some preliminary numbers. So things are looking better on that side. And if we can do things that way, then that's another revenue source for us to be able to make up some of those numbers. As we know, and in the report, it says that, council sets the tax rate, and our tax rate's X right now. The only thing that we show is the growth in the sand tax with the revals, but if council leaves it at 5 cents, that's council's decision. If they lower it to 4 or 3, then that's the number. So those are the things that we don't have ironed out that maybe we can look at. And then the January, February, March kind of timeframe, you'll already have one of your budget workshops in January. You'll have your rate thing in December. So you'll have more knowledge of what the next few years look like. At that time, that may be the best way to go.
I heartily concur, and I think Councilman Martin, who's not here, but to give him credit, called for a financial workshop in December. So that would be the time where some of these decisions could be broached and when data will be more plentiful, and we can see where we are with some of the other big projects that are in motion. So that makes sense.
Is there a rush are we gonna lose anything by
No, sir.
moving it back? No.
No, like I said, the projects that we had, we've planted the grass that we got, and that is growing, because all this goes by, as Courtney can explain maybe later. What it is, the grass, we go back to measure first line stable vegetation, and that's growing. So while council's deciding on what they need to do, you're not inhibiting anything, it's growing, and that'll be where we go back and measure to anyway. The window that we have, like I said, if anything damages the home between that date and then whatever date forward, then that's what you have to look at. But you have time, there's no pressure from the state, there's no pressure from anyone else, or even yourselves. This came, in front of you, and we had to start acting on it, or not to act on it, whichever choice it goes. And so that's what the aggressive timetable came. We already had a lot of the information, so we knew we could get something out. And so that's where we're at sitting today, and it's basically a decision council gets to make.
So,
And, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Just one comment about that as far as, and I'm not positive and we can find out, is there may be a timeline. Right now, whether we wait from November till February, probably even April, I don't think it has any effect because, as David said, that first line of stable natural vegetation has not established itself. So we're still going to be bound by that 1998 pre-project line or static line that's there. However, in order to get the plan adopted, I would recommend doing it sooner than later, because if we continue to have to update the plan based on annual monitoring surveys, we may not be at those triggers when we submit the plan, and we may take a chance of getting the plan adopted.
Yeah.
Is that a fair statement, Doug?
That makes sense.
Take that chance too.
Sam, if, I might be the only one that does not understand this, but we have $40 million allocated for 2023, 2024 for Phase 3. After we spend that $40 million for Phase 3, would we not then have a different vegetation line or static line? Or is CRC just going to go with the developmental line and nothing else?
No, once the plan is in place, whether you've done the 24, 25, if the plan has been adopted, we planted back a year ago, so basically in the summer of 2021 or spring, summer of 2021, we planted, spring, summer of 2022, we planted. So there is a chance, I would say, if DCM adopts this minimum 2 years of planting, that, and the project is 24, 25, that there's a chance that if the dunes have, the vegetation has established, that pre-project line could move out to that first line of stable natural vegetation in 2023, maybe on the east end, 2024 on the west end, if that 2-year rule change is adopted, or if the grass has also established itself.
Again, with optimistic thinking and looking at Sheila's favorite graph here, if that were to be the case, then the dotted line would move forward so much closer to the purple line.
That's the goal, and we are actually in discussions with DCM right now to allow us to plant down the face of the dune. Right now, they're not letting us, but we're trying to get them to allow us to. So there's places that we need to plant down the face of the dune to get that first line of natural stable vegetation, or stable natural vegetation, enough away from or 60 feet in front of the development line, so when that setback becomes similar to the development line. That's the ultimate goal, is to reestablish that line of vegetation, so when you do the 60-foot setback, we're back at the purple line.
But as of right now, the purple line's gone, correct?
Purple line is gone, the green dash line is what you're living with.
Okay.
And let me just belabor it, just one more question, and thank you for all your preparation. So if we were to get, and I'm the eternal optimist, if we were to be able to accomplish that in 24 and 25, then 80% of our homes at that particular moment would not be in the non-conforming section.
You would be back to, if, it wouldn't necessarily take till 24, 25. It's the establishment of the vegetation. Once that was established, then you will be back to the purple line.
Okay.
So yes,
And
you
then we
will
still
not
need a
have
plan of
80%
some
of the
sort,
property.
I understand.
And it may be that, for instance, you had a washout at a location. So it's an individual development, decision by DCM.
Okay.
So any place where vegetation has established and becomes stable, natural, and growing rhizomes, right? I mean, then that is the point where you can start measuring the setback from, assuming the plan has been adopted.
The line of vegetation is, when does it come in? Is it 2 years it takes for it to grow? What is who blesses it and says this is it?
DCM. They come out and survey it, look at it and say, put a stake in the ground and say, we measure back from here.
If I could,
Come on.
If you'll come to the podium, thank you.
if I could, we're talking about a 2-year period after planting before the vegetation can be considered stable and natural. It's important to note that is a minimum of 2 years, and it still has to meet the other criteria of rhizomes taking over. It can't look like a planted hayfield. It really has to look as a natural area, but that determination can't be made for a minimum of 2 years. There are places it may take 3 or 4 to get to that point. But it's not an absolute that at 2 years what you've planted becomes stable. You still have to apply those other criteria to it.
Thank you.
But we did start in 21.
Yeah, so again, as Doug said, if the other criteria, I have always said, if it has become stable, natural vegetation, which has to meet the criteria that Doug just said, if there's that 2-year period, it would be eligible come summer of '23 on the east end, summer of '22 on the west end, or '24 on the west end, assuming it meets all the other criteria.
Thank you,
And they make that rule change as a minimum of 2 years. There's a lot of what-ifs.
So just submitting an application and having it accepted, right? So that we have a beach management plan doesn't require us as a municipality to assume the more seaward line, we could still take a conservative approach and stay at the pre-project line as a setback, correct?
That's, I mean,
That would be up
the
to
town
us.
could make those regulations. I mean, internally, I would assume you're allowed to set your envelopes wherever you want to.
What makes me nervous is whether or not we decide down the road to continue to participate or not. Is there other reasons that could make us out of compliance with the beach management plan? You're assuming that we can permit the 99 million cubic yards of sand, right? Which may not be possible. We may not have the money or choose to spend that money in terms of, depending on what else is going on. So there are other reasons than simply choosing to move forward with this that might kick us back to the pre-project line, which makes me nervous that we would yo-yo in that way. And I don't know it'd be interesting to hear what Brian has to say in terms of
Anything,
what our
anything that
liability would be.
prevents you, Mayor, anything that prevents you from maintaining the beach per the plan will set you back when it comes up for review the next time.
Exactly, right.
So, I mean, yeah, it could be a litany of things, whether you don't have the money, we don't have a permitted sand source. Now, if we're, this will be another question for Doug, but if we're working towards permitting a sand source and it's in the works and we've hit the triggers, but we're trying to, and we have the financial wherewithal to do it, will they accept it? I don't know come on up if you, but there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of little
Lot of
things like that
nuances, right.
that are with that, but I don't know if that's.
My thought on that, if you're working to permit sand sources or additional sand sources, and you're continuing to show when you come up at your 5-year period for the readoption of the beach management plan by the CRC, my view would be, not speaking for them, that they would be rather generous in their determination on that. If they still believe that you are making all of the efforts, they have to understand the difficulties associated with doing projects of this nature, especially down here where there are so many pressures on the sand resources, et cetera. So I would think that at that 5-year period, they may say, hey, we want to make sure that you keep moving forward, et cetera. The next time you come back in another 5 years, make sure you have this done. But I'd be very surprised if, in the scenario that Sam laid out, if they would then deny the beach management plan at that point in time and force you to go back to that static line or the pre-project line.
Could I ask Doug one more question?
Please, go.
So the static line exemption that's in place now for the other municipalities, that goes away at the end of their period, whatever period that is, then they have to go to this beach management plan as well. They don't carry any more static line exemption permits past this.
That's basically correct. The static lines that they have now are still valid under I think they may have changed the term to beach management plan now, but they are still valid until their readoption period, and I think most of those are at least 4 years away. But when they come up for the readoption period at the end of that 5-year period, they then have to make that, what used to be the static line exception plan, they need to make that consistent with the new beach management plan, which really, for a lot of the communities, they're already doing most of that. The new beach management plan probably requires a little bit more information in terms of the financial resources, but most of those communities that I've been involved with probably should be able to, in some cases, it may be not much more than changing the cover letter or the cover page on their static line exception report to a beach management plan. So, but they would need to come in compliance with the new set of rules.
So we would be doing nothing different than what everybody else has been doing or currently doing We would just
basically,
now
yes,
be
sir.
in-
Yes, sir, for the most part.
Thanks, Doug.
So another point that I think is worth, now that we've kind of separated out which line we use versus the decision to move forward with the beach management plan, we certainly don't want to be in the position we are today, not having, or pre-2020, I guess, where we hadn't put sand on the beach, any significant amount of sand on the beach for 20 years. That would not serve us well. But the absence of a beach management plan would exclude us from any grants, state grants, and/or assistance in any form from the state. Would that be correct? So we'd be kind of out there on our own. I can't imagine the
I don't
state
know.
would give us money if we're not participating in their plan.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me to answer.
Okay. At least if I were the state and we weren't working within the program they've given us, I think it would be hard to send money our way in that regard, but,
I don't know, the state created this problem, they should help us.
well, true, but they want us to participate in the plan as well. But that is a good point. And non-conforming is not a new issue for us. This is something, we've had non-conforming properties on the beachfront prior to this, right? Prior to August 1.
Before 2016, when we were going by the static line, I don't know the number, but there was some non-conforming, then the development line started. I'm not sure, Dara may have numbers in her head, but I don't. Well, I was in a different field then, so I don't know what this was doing.
Yeah, we can't.
I-
Well, I mean, we don't have.
It had to be up to the mayor.
but we don't
If
have
it's
public
information
comment.
that would benefit us, otherwise I would just suggest that in the future, at some point, that we give some perspective to the issue of non-conforming.
We will look up and come back with you with some data prior to the 2016 when the development line started and what we were doing before, and we will get that back to council.
Yeah, and the delta with August 1 determinations, I think that would be helpful information.
Doug, if I may ask you, sir, the CRC came out with this August 1st,
Yes, sir.
kind of roughed us up. How often do they come out with the change? I mean, if we go down that road now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, they're going to have a whole different situation we need to be looking at? Is that their standard?
I won't say it's a standard, but anytime you're dealing with a governmental agency that is dealing with rules and regulations, as the personalities of those bodies change, you can potentially see additional changes take place. I wouldn't bet my money in trying to guess what a commission in 2 years or 3 years might do in regards to that.
That's called lawyer speak, Bill.
I understood you,
A
sir.
law degree when I worked for the state. They took it away from me though when I left, so.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much
Lot
for
of
coming. We really
preparation. Thank you for
appreciate
your
it.
hard
Thanks
work.
for your effort.
Sam, Doug?
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Well, no, I'm sorry. You've got an
Well,
announcement?
we have a storm out there brewing around, as we all know. So the county is gonna start giving updates through their services tomorrow. So Mike, the magician back behind the glass, he's already started the information page for the storms. So people can look at that. We'll start having some information on the electronic signs on the streets, saying about, possible flooding of the roadways. We had a staff meeting this morning to talk about things, and then we'll have a staff meeting later this week to see what needs we need to do. We do have a few events at 8:01 that we'll be looking at to see what we can do about those, postponing them or canceling them, or the 2 weddings. So we'll have to see what that happens. But I think right this minute, we're in good shape, and we have everything laid out that way. Just to let everybody know, we are gonna get some rain, it looks like, and we're gonna have some, flooding in the areas that we usually have. And we'll put out there, watch out for the flooding, stay out of the floodwaters, and those kind of things. So just a quick update, and Mike will keep updating the web pages.
Excellent. Is there anything else we need to cover?
No, ma'am, we'll have, a special notice will be going out for the October 4th meeting. And that's all I have.
Motion to adjourn, Madam Mayor?
Second.
Yes, thank you. All in favor?